In the previous video, we looked at how to customize the look and feel of content asset types using so-called asset type actions. There's actually another cool feature that asset type actions allow you to do, and that is to provide a custom editing UI for your asset. As I've mentioned in a previous video, by default, when you double-click on an asset in the content browser, it will open up a details panel, just like the details panel that you know from the editor. And the contents of that details panel are generated automatically using the code in your text asset type declaration. Now, in this case, you see I opened up the asset editor for my text asset, and it didn't show a details panel. It actually showed a multi-line editing UI. And that's because I implemented a custom asset editor toolkit. And there's just one method in our asset type actions that you have to override. It's called open asset editor. And if that's implemented, then you can pretty much return whatever user interface you would like. But before we go into the details of that, let's talk a little bit about user interfaces in general in Unreal Engine 4. So everything you see in the editor, and also everything you see for game UI inside games and applications, is implemented using our so-called Slate user interface framework. Slate is a fairly large collection of code that implements user widgets like buttons and list boxes and tree views, and pretty much everything you see in the editor is some sort of Slate widget. So when you create your own asset editor for your new content asset types, you will also be using Slate to implement those UIs. And it's important that you understand how Slate works. Let's go over that. So first of all, Slate is entirely written in C++. It's part of the engine. It used to be just one module called Slate, but we split it up not too long ago into two separate modules. One is called Slate and the other one is Slate Core. You can find those in your Visual Studio solution under Engine. You go into Source and then into Runtime, and if you scroll all the way down, you'll see Slate and Slate Core. So this is where all the good stuff is. Slate Core, as the name suggests, has just very basic core functionality. And then Slate is the module that includes all the fun widgets, you know, all the different things you can show on a user interface. So everything is in here. One really cool thing about Slate is that it's platform agnostic, so it runs not just on Windows, but also everywhere that Unreal Engine 4 is supported on, including video game consoles and mobile devices. It does not require any engine or editor dependencies, so you can actually use it for writing standalone applications that do not depend on the engine at all. It's completely self-sufficient. And we use Slate pretty much everywhere. All our tools, the editor itself, and even our in-game user interfaces, for the most part, use the Slate user interface library. Slate it doesn't just render widgets such as buttons and list boxes. It also performs various other UI-related functions, such as handling the input from your mouse or keyboard, or perhaps even joysticks or joypads. It also handles key bindings. You're probably familiar with those. Then Slate also allows you to customize the styles. Styles are used for rendering the widgets, so you can modify how a button looks or how certain things are rendered on the user interface. So it doesn't have to be all gray like the editor. You can use it for user interfaces in your games and make them look fun and colorful. It also handles animations and images and font rendering. And you can even do more complex layouts. There's a whole layout system built in to arrange widgets relative to each other. One little lesser known detail is that Slate is not just engine agnostic but also render agnostic. So you can also use it in applications that don't use the RHI that's built into the engine. Slate actually includes a separate standalone renderer that is decoupled from the engine RHI, and that's what makes it possible to render user interfaces on applications that are not actually built on the engine framework. And then, of course, like I said, the most important feature for you is the very large library of user widgets that Slate already ships with. Now, when you program in Slate, it might be a little bit different from what you're used to if you've worked with other user interface libraries. A lot of libraries out there are very imperative. You first declare some widget objects, and then you call several functions one after another on these objects to wire them up and to do certain things. Slate doesn't quite work that way. It uses a small set of macros to allow you to build user interface widgets in C++ using what we call a declarative syntax. And that's really just one large C++ expression to basically build an entire user interface or like a subcomponent of a user interface using a single expression in code. And another thing that makes Slate different from many other user interface libraries is that it is not based on inheritance. In a lot of libraries, you have to inherit from some base type of widget in order to create a new type of widget. Slate doesn't work that way. Slate favors composition over inheritance. And it means that you can combine almost any widget with each other in arbitrary ways. And I'll show you that shortly, how that works. Here's some contrived code that I quickly put together to show you how to declare a new type of widget in C++. In this case, I'm just creating a text button. On the left-hand side, you can see the declaration of my text button class. And on the right-hand side, there's the implementation, specifically the construct function, which is executed when our widget is constructed. And let's take a look at the implementation first, because it's a little easier to understand. It's really simple. It just really creates a button widget, and then it puts a text block inside of it. We have these little macros called asNew. They are basically just constructing a new instance of this particular class. And you see, this is what I was talking about compositing user interfaces using this declarative syntax. So here you basically have a single expression that starts here on top with asNew, and it ends at the bottom. And you use composition to put a text block inside the button. So a button by itself actually doesn't have anything inside of it. A lot of UI libraries already include some kind of text field or text property that their buttons have. In Slate, it doesn't work that way. A button is really just it's just a widget that behaves like a button. But what's inside the button is up to you. So here we just put a text block in it to show some click me label. But it could really be anything. It could be an image, or it could even be a 3D rendering, or it could be a combination of multiple widgets. It's totally up to you. Let's take a quick look on the left side here for the declaration of the text button class. There are some more macros that you don't have to understand right now, but sooner or later you'll get used to them. At the very top, this whole block here, we declare the attributes and arguments that our widget provides. And all this does is basically it makes it possible to expose fields like here on the right, onClicked or .font or .text or .tooltip text. Those are all Slate attributes, and these macros do nothing else but making these available here. So you can chain your entire UI declaration together in one single statement. And then at the bottom is just a declaration of the construct function which we implemented over here. So it looks a little convoluted at first, but it's pretty straightforward. Just like with view objects, we use a number of macros to add some features to C++ that aren't really available out of the box. Now you may wonder, with all this Slate UI stuff here in the editor, where do I get started, and how can I ever get a handle of how this all works? Perhaps you find something in our user interface that's really cool and that you would like to replicate in your own plugin. We actually have a really nice tool that helps you locate the code where we implemented our own UI, and it's called the Widget Reflector. And let me give you a quick demo. Few people know this, but it's really powerful. You can get to it by clicking on Window. You go to Developer Tools, and at the very bottom there's the Widget Reflector. And it opens a new window. And the next thing you do is pick Live Widget. And now this activates the Widget Reflector, and you can now hover over any user interface element in the editor or any of its open windows. Like you can open our text asset editor here, and you see you can pretty much select any widget that is visible on the screen. And when you're done, when you found the widget you're interested in, you press Escape, and this will lock the Widget Reflector, and it shows you all kinds of useful information. So most importantly, it shows you the widget hierarchy. Remember how we just built this hypothetical text button widget using the composition of an S button and an S text block? Well, this is the composition of the entire editor up until the image that I selected in this little toolbar button here for the marketplace. So you can actually see how all of the widgets in the editor relate to each other and how they were built. And over here on the right, there's actually a little link that you can click, and it will bring you to the code in Visual Studio where this particular widget was created. So for example, if we navigated to a use case of our text button widget and we selected the S text block, if we clicked on that link, Visual Studio would jump directly to this line of code. So that's a really, really useful tool to just get started with Slate and better understand how things are built. Don't be afraid to dive into the code. That's really the only way to learn. See how we have done things in the past, and most of the time those are pretty solid patterns that you can follow in your own project. All right, I want to show you one more thing, how the things you see in the widget reflector and the things you see in the user interface correlate to what's written in code. Again, the code, when you look at it first, it might seem a little overwhelming, but I would like to show you that it follows a very simple pattern. And with a little bit of practice, you can actually visualize in your mind what a user interface is going to look like just by looking at the code. In this example, I just picked the color picker. You're almost certainly familiar with it. The color picker in the editor, it has a small number of widgets, such as the color wheel, and there are some sliders for brightness and saturation and some other things. I just picked this section here in the center, which encompasses the color wheel and the two sliders. And you can see in the user interface how the color wheel is inside a, like this green box indicates the color wheel, and it's inside a horizontal panel in red, which horizontally aligns the color wheel next to the two sliders. And then those widgets are composed inside an S overlay, which is shown in blue. You can kind of see the same structure down here in the widget reflector. It's the color wheel inside the horizontal box, inside the overlay, same thing. Now if you go over to the code, you have the exact same structure right there. It's the color wheel inside the horizontal box next to the two sliders, and all those are inside the overlay in blue. So I hope that will make it more clear how these things are related. The code, the widget reflector, and how the widgets actually look like in your user interface. Now that you know a little bit more about Slate, we can take a look at how to implement an actual custom asset editor in our next video.